Excuse me while I poke some shit with a stick. I'm sorry for the delay in videos, but unfortunately sometimes I have to move from litigation to potentially dodging lead. The litigious bastards I have to deal with have gotten so much play of late that it's squeezed out well-undeserved mention of the real internet heroes. That being people who threaten to kill me for reasons known only to themselves, their underachieving psychiatrists, and assuming she's not already in the basement freezer, their moms. Which I've tried to handle over the years with a certain level of indifference, bemusement, and if at all possible, hilarity. Although that's probably just an aspect of my coping mechanism of trying to find something to laugh about in things that are absolutely not funny. Still, there's something deeply disturbing about some fat asshat sending you a picture of their Glock, still in the case by the way, with the completely reasonable observation that, should I not be doing what he thinks I should be doing, he'll actually pry his supersized buns of glory off the couch and, after a couple of stops for KFC and to hyperventilate, shoot me coming out my door. That was just one of the variants in the several ways he proposed to shoot me. And here, heavily pixelated, is the fat asshat in question, where you can see if he has a theme, it's round. You know, if you spend enough time on the internet, especially if you spend the amount of time dealing with the toxic scum that settles to the bottom as I do, then eventually someone is going to threaten to shoot you. Well, especially if you're the advanced level pain in the ass that I am. Two invariables here. These sort of clowns invariably threaten to shoot me, not strangle, which is the most personal, hands-on way of doing it, or beat me with a baseball bat, because even a cursory analysis of the type shows that athleticism of any form simply isn't their bag. They don't even threaten to stab me, which is fine with me. Been there, done that, thanks to 3 butthurt Harley dudes in Buffalo, New York, by the way. I've told this story on Vito D'Amico's podcast, but it's like this. I was 20 years old in Buffalo, New York, living off campus. I parked my Suzuki motorcycle behind a barn on Main Street, PJ bottoms, and carried in my helmet. There were some Harley riding biker dudes there, and we talked motorcycles for a bit. And when I left, I noticed that they were following right behind me. And then I heard the asshole in charge say, "You're not a bro." And then when I turned, he sucker punched me right in the face. And when I started to get up from being knocked down, one of his 2 other fellow dirtbags kicked me in the face. In the ensuing fight, one of them stabbed me twice. It was only walking to my house a couple of blocks away that I realized I was bleeding a lot. 20 years old, and when the ambulance came, I insisted on walking to it rather than being put on a gurney, because no one ever died standing up, right? No, it's always shooting with these people. The threat of someone whose physical prowess doesn't extend much beyond the exertion needed for 3 pounds of trigger pull. And that's because of the second invariable. They're always fat fucking slobs. We're talking about the fat fucking slobbage whose total round baby face is ruined only by their aversion to shaving and anything involving cardio. Like being stabbed, I have some history with people threatening to shoot me. The first being way back when in the day, when a total tool associated with a right-wing group, the anti-idiotarian Rottweilers, who likened himself Lord Spatula, took it upon himself to teach me a lesson and, like those before him and after him, entered into ass-handed infamy. Lord Spatula, real name Steve Krager, made a habit of these sort of threats that bordered on an obsession. Typically, his reaction to any disagreement was an invitation to come say it to my face, his face being somewhere in Texas. And just in case you didn't see the well-laid trap he was laying out for the unwary, he and his posse were known to pose with pictures of their pimped-out Kimber 1911 A1s, posing this way and that, and in the process of posing, they mostly posed a danger to low-flying flocks of birds and each other's feet. Now, sometime in the year 2005, I had a run-in with Lord Spatula, mostly because he considered anything politically to the left of the Waffen-SS to be pansy-ass communism, and the person who held any beliefs other than his own, a natural invitee to say it to his face. I, being me, was more than happy to say it to his face, but as the one challenged, thought it was only fair that he lumped it to Virginia like a man of honor. We went back and forth in an increasingly ridiculous series of posturing emails in which I tried to dial the proposed violence down to something a bit more moderate, like a knife fight, and then finally a nice, friendly cage fight. The prospect of the two of us going MMA on each other was so appealing that people began raising money for what was known as the Memphis Compromise, where we would meet at the geographic midpoint of Memphis, Tennessee, all expenses paid, and set our differences in a display of sheer manliness. Lord Spatula, having run out of ways to parse the terms so that they were not quite to his liking, eventually backed out and backed down. The entire ridiculous threat display is preserved on archive.org, link below, and was covered by various outlets including Metafilter, Cruel Sight of the Day, The Daily Kos, and David Newart's blog, Orkinus. The takeaway lesson from this debacle was that, of course, these sort of bullies always back down, as what interests them is the maximum threat display with the minimum of actual effort. The practical effect was that the incident put a serious cramp on Lord Spatula's ability to believably threaten people, as anyone had to do was to throw out a couple of links to show how little he was dedicated to the idea of actually following through. Of course, it does occur to me that somehow, some way, someone might follow through, and it would stand to reason that it would be who you'd think would be the least likely candidate to do so. One thing that's always missing from their threat is anything like an endgame. Once you shoot me, what do you plan to do then? Go on the lam? Head for Disneyland? You got a step missing there, Sparky. This latest threat has the distinction of not being directly related to my channel or much else related to the internet, save an extracurricular investigation into a person who, as my first impression of them slowly eroded, was revealed to be nothing that they said they were, and was in fact a remorseless serial liar who, I suspect, instigated this sad case into making what is an unequivocal death threat of the Class 6 felony variety. As this threat is still under investigation, I'm going to forego the particulars, the principal actors, and the situation in general, for now. Though I take these kind of threats as seriously as the threat itself requires, I tend not to take the person who makes them, or at least their motivations, seriously at all. That's not really a contradiction. John Hinckley was serious as all hell in unloading a revolver at then-President Reagan, but his motivation, that this would somehow impress Jodie Foster, was simply ludicrous. The act itself, the threat, may be serious, but what one has to keep in mind is that someone who resorts to this sort of threat is simply expressing their own impotence, frustrated in their inability to make other people, and reality itself, bend to their weak wills. But something like this is no longer disagreement. This is pathology. And the only kind of person who advises you that they know where you live, or rather, the person instigating them knows where you live, and sends you a picture of their well-fondled firearm that gives them a tangible sense of power otherwise missing from their psyche, and promises to shoot you coming out your door, who really knows how deep their rabbit hole goes? I am reasonably sure that the sort of person who makes these threats of violence has never really been touched by it themselves. As much as I might want to make light of the limp-dicked cowardice of the sort of person who makes these threats, I realize that very often following through with violence is exactly the sort of thing these cowards do. Again, only those not touched by violence will make cavalier reference to it. You see, back in Arizona, there was Rachel. Rachel had terrible taste in men. I mean, she dated this Persian guy who I swear would get all ticked off at her if she touched the thermostat without asking for permission. What an asshole, right? Well, she ditched that asshole and found herself an even bigger one. Married him, in fact. She was in Las Vegas when she finally had enough and loaded up her Ford Mustang with her stuff. Somewhere in the process of almost making it out of there, he appeared, along with the .22 caliber rifle he had bought a couple of weeks before. Rachel didn't go out the front door, didn't take the obvious means of escape, because her 2.5-year-old daughter, Emily, was in the backyard. She went through a ground floor window trying to get to her daughter before he shot her in the leg. When she fell face down in the backyard, he then leaned out the window and shot her 5 times in the back of the head. He then wandered around for an hour or so, weighing his options, before shooting himself in the head. For the next couple of hours, there was nothing to keep Emily company but her mother's dead body. We thought at least one saving grace was that she was too young to remember this. But she did. When she was old enough to articulate it, she remembered her mother clawing at the ground, saying no, no, no. Last I heard, Emily was in the Army. And you know when you think back to your earliest childhood memories, guess what hers is? See, at that point, I stopped trying to understand the sort of person who makes threats like this. I don't know how someone like this thinks they're keeping it real. But if I'm sure of anything, I know that someone like this has never had to bury a friend and couldn't say goodbye because it was a closed casket funeral. Not only did those 5 bullets exit through Rachel's face, but the Las Vegas police left her laying face down in the baking sun for hours. And there's only so much cosmetically a mortician can do. Sometimes you really have to understand someone to understand that, well, they really aren't worth understanding. And sometimes you don't. The act, the threat, may be a bluff, or it may be the precursor to someone utterly overwhelmed by their own powerlessness, taking the mental steps necessary to follow through. As there's really no way to know which is which, I will take something like this seriously and do what is necessary to make someone so mentally weak and reckless as to make such a threat, own it, and answer for it.
After